The world doesn't seem to be doing all that well lately. And there are many reasons. It's not just this pandemic, which obviously has been horrific, but we're also beginning to see the long term impacts of this crisis as businesses shut down and may not open, as jobs, maybe whole sectors of employment, seem to be disappearing, never to return. We are seeing just how fragile the security we once took for granted really is. And people are wondering what life is going to be like for them once this is over, how they're going to be able to make a living. Also, at the same time, it's almost like the United States is kind of falling apart as racism, which has always been there, is exposed in its ongoing brutality. And we've seen so clearly what Black people there face day in, day out as they deal with fear and violence and systemic persecution, and as we recognize how much of that is also in our own country. And some people have stood up and demanded change and are met with intensified violence. All is not well. The world's not in good shape, but I guess my key question on this day is, what do we as people of faith do about that? Now, I am the first to confess that I do not have all the answers. I'm not in the position to implement policy changes, and even if I were, I'm not entirely sure that I know what needs to be done to make things better. But surely this is not a time for us to simply do nothing. Surely, as people of faith, we need to be using that faith to reach out and to make a difference. And my question today is, how do we do that? What do we do? I am struck between the strong connections between the times that we're now living in and the situation that was faced by Jesus and his disciples in the early first century of the Common Era. Galilee in the time of Jesus, to put it bluntly, was kind of a mess. Now, they weren't dealing with exactly the things we're dealing with today. They didn't have a pandemic. As far as we can tell, there wasn't a lot of racial tension. It wasn't a big problem in the first century. In fact, there's no evidence that anyone was treated differently because of the color of their skin at that time. So the causes were not the same, but the effects that they were dealing with are eerily similar. They had economic devastation. The policies of King Herod Antipas, ruler of Galilee, were pushing people into extreme economic hardship. People were losing their family farms and their properties as taxes and debts were piled on top of them. Fishermen on the Sea of Galilee were no longer able to make ends meet as they dealt with King Herod's ever-increasing demand that appropriated more and more of the fish that they caught. There is a reason why so many fishermen were willing to give up their nets and walk away from the job they'd always done, the only job they knew, to follow Jesus. Their lives were no longer sustainable. As a result of these and many other problems, people in Galilee were living with devastating consequences. And many of them were stricken with what they called demon possession. We wouldn't call it by that name, of course. We would probably call what they were dealing with depression, or in some cases addiction or malnutrition, or simply people acting out in ways that were dangerous to themselves or others. Those were all ailments that they tended to put in the category of demon possession, because that's how they understood such things. And they even had severe cases where individuals were so devastated by the so-called spiritual ailments they were suffering from, they were literally paralyzed. They could not move, or blinded as a result. Now, we do have problems like that with us today. And many indications are that the recent crises have only made those problems worse. Now, we don't call such conditions demon possession today, and there's some really good reasons why we don't do that. It's not accurate. But people are dealing with exactly the same kinds of problems in many cases as what plagued people in the Galilean countryside in Jesus' day. We are told in our reading this morning that Jesus sent the 12 out into a countryside that was dealing with all of that and more. Now, what was the point of sending these people out at such a time? They could not change the political or economic policies of Herod. They weren't going to fix what was wrong with the country. So what were they supposed to do? I'd love to get the answer to that question, because it might provide for us a way to respond to the very real challenges and struggles that our world is dealing with right now. So let's take a good look at the instructions that Jesus gave to his disciples as he sent them out. The first thing we need to note is, of course, that he sent them out. Now, I hope that you realize that this is actually not the model of ministry that we've had in the church for centuries now. Our model of ministry in the church is not to send people out into the world. The model that we have is to bring all kinds of people who are struggling in various ways into the church. We bring them in and we preach at them. We bring them in and try and solve them and their problems with the programs of the church. But we're in a time now where that model of ministry all of a sudden doesn't really work, because we can't bring anyone, especially not any strangers, into our building. So maybe, this is a really good time to explore Jesus' approach to ministry in this passage. Maybe it's time to go out. The church is actually at its best when we stop demanding that people change to fit what we want them to be so that they will come in and join us, and instead we go out and meet people where they are in the midst of the struggles of their lives. Now that leads us to our next question, or my next question. What do we actually have to offer to the people that we meet who are struggling in various things in the world right now? Well, here is what Jesus says to his disciples. As you go, he says, proclaim the good news. Proclaim the good news. And there is absolutely no doubt that people are very much in need of good news at this moment. And Jesus is clear about what that good news is. This is what they are to proclaim. The kingdom of heaven has come near. When the world's not doing very well, what kind of good news do people need to hear? Jesus kind of hits the nail on the head with this one. When the systems of this world are falling apart, where it's gotten to the place where it's plain that the system is not serving the people, the good news that people need to hear is that there is another way, another system. Whenever Jesus spoke of the kingdom of God, he was putting forth the promise that, yes, there was another system, there was another way of doing things, and that the world could be different. And I believe that this is absolutely a message we need to be willing to share today. If you're only going out there and giving people the impression that nothing in the world needs to change and that you only need to trust in Jesus for your own personal salvation, you are not proclaiming the same gospel that Jesus gave to his disciples to share. The vision of the kingdom that Jesus held up is never easy. It's never going to come without some trouble. But it's still the best news that we have to offer to this world. But as Jesus sent the disciples out, he didn't just give them something to say, he also gave them something to do. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. And I know how this part of Jesus' marching orders sounds. Makes it sound as if we're supposed to go out there and perform impossible miracles for the people we meet. And if that's what it is, then I think that most of us would say, and rightly say, well, that's outside of my skill set. What we need to understand is that as we need to see this part of the mission in the terms that they would have understood it in Jesus' day. Remember, they understood that anything that was bad in someone's life was to be understood and seen in almost exclusively spiritual terms. As people in Jesus' world were beaten down by poverty and social exclusion and hopelessness, these things manifested themselves in what they saw as spiritual ailments and demon possession, but that we might understand as mental illness or malnutrition or skin conditions or anger or apathy. Yes, it appears that some of the people that Jesus sent out did perform wonders and signs and miraculous healings, but I'm not convinced that that was the main point of what he was telling them to do. He was saying to them that they needed to meet people where they were, understand with empathy the struggles they were having, and that were literally making them sick. The healing that Jesus was sending his disciples out to do was all about ministering to the whole person, giving to each person a sense of their own dignity and power, and above all, a reason to hope. That's a kind of healing, my friends, that we can all be involved in. It doesn't replace the extraordinary work done by medical professionals, of course, but it's still a necessary kind of healing, very much needed in the world today. So, for example, when you stand up against the injustices of this world, when you demand opportunities be given to those trapped in poverty or excluded, or those who belong in minority groups, when you oppose the evils of this world, including systemic prejudice and racism, you are engaged in the type of mission that Jesus was sending his disciples out to be involved in. You are involved in bringing healing. Much of what is found in these marching orders that Jesus gave to his disciples. There's so much to be found in these marching orders that Jesus gave to his disciples. I cannot cover all of them. I could go on forever talking about the implications and the applications of what he said. But there's one more that I feel I need to highlight at this moment. Because I have a big question that I think we need to consider in the midst of our present challenges, and that is this. How do we deal with opposition? What should our response be when people are uninterested in what we have to say, or even openly hostile? Well, Jesus does not fail to prepare the disciples for that possibility as well. Whatever town or village you enter, he says, find out who in it is worthy, and stay there until you leave. As you enter the house, greet it. If the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. This makes it clear what our attitude should be. We should be determined to be peaceful, not to force our way in, not to force people to listen to us, to respect other people and their thoughts and their ideas. Being worthy and seeking worthiness to others, Jesus suggests, will find us in a situation where people are a blessing to us and we are a blessing to the people that we meet. Jesus' advice for dealing with apathy and opposition maybe requires a little bit of explanation. He says this, if anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town. Now, taking off our shoes and shaking out dust really wouldn't mean very much to ourselves or to others today. It might get us a laugh because it's kind of bizarre behavior, but that's about it. But this action had very clear meaning to people in Jesus' time. It was an action that would commonly be carried out by observant Jews when they left a certain town or city that was under Gentile control. It was basically a way for a Jew to say, hey, I'll be me and you be you. I'll do me, you do you. I'm not going to hold any baggage from our interaction. I'm going to move on from here. Respect for you for who you are. And if that's going to be the attitude that Jesus would like us to bring them to less than ideal interactions, I think that's kind of the way to go. Don't carry baggage. But you should go. The world's not at its best these days. People are struggling. People know the times are hard, and they need some good news. I know that the limitations placed upon us because of this pandemic make this maybe more complicated than ever, but we have a message, and it can help and it can make a difference. I believe if we go and we find people and encounter people with an openness to the opportunity that God places before us, we do have a chance to bring real healing and hope and possibility in some pretty difficult times. Let's pray. Beloved God, we are living in interesting times and worrisome times and frightening times. But thank you, you give us a message, and it is a message of good news. Let us not hesitate to share it in word and in deed as we meet the people who are truly struggling in this world right now. Amen.